Hi, and welcome to Between Two Speakers. I'm Randy Ford, writer and storytelling strategist at First Story Strategies.
And I'm Mariana Swallow, public speaking coach and instructor of business and professional speaking at Loyola University. I'm really excited to talk with all of you today, but all of you watching today too, because we have a special guest with us. Today, visiting us, you can see in the screen, is Susan Dennison, who is the communications manager at the Indian Trails Library in Illinois. Hi, Susan.
Hi, how you guys doing?
Good,
Great,
Susan.
thanks. Susan, in your role, tell us a little bit about your role, because you are responsible for coordinating programs where you have live speakers, but also your role entails being on a lot of webinars. Is that correct?
That's correct. I do all the promotions and the marketing for the Indian Trails Library, and I also do program recommendations. So I'm assessing a lot of people whether they should be presenting to the library in a program. This could be anywhere from somebody who's a specialist in a certain area to an author that perhaps we want to have come in and visit the library. And then we do a lot of webinars also, mostly through training and that sort of thing that we're presenting either to staff or to our members.
So tell us a little bit about in your role, because you do have these responsibilities, and it's interesting that you said you also kind of, you're responsible for vetting who comes into the library for programs. What are some do's and don'ts for speakers who might be presenting at a live program at your library?
Okay. I've sat through, and as I'm sure we all have, I've sat through some really awesome programs. I've sat through some programs that were really painful that you are thinking this is never going to end. And there's definitely a couple things that come up when I think about a really good presenter. And like your first impressions visually, I think that a presenter has mere seconds to catch the audience's attention. And it's important that that's done strong, that you come out there with a certain confidence and a certain presence that you're in front of the audience. I always like a presenter who comes out and starts with an anecdote, because that storytelling is so important when you're presenting to audiences. I'm captivated when a presenter says, well, I'm going to tell you about a time, I got lost in the forest and this is what happened and this is how I came to write my book on survival skills. So I think that storytelling aspect is very, very important with a good presenter. I think a good presenter is also very aware of their audience. They're tailoring their talk to their audience. And because we span ages from seniors to middle school kids that are at an author event, you need to make sure that the language is sort of adapted to who your audience is, and making sure that you're using, catchphrases that they would be familiar with. Sometimes what happens is that a speaker can use an idiom or catchphrase that goes over the audience's head, especially if you're older and you're using something and you've got a younger audience, they're not going to get that. So it's being aware sort of the language of your audience also. Something else that I think is very important nowadays, especially, is for the speaker to be vulnerable when they're speaking. To be able to say, if they get asked a question that they don't know, oh, I'm really sorry, I don't know an answer to that, but if you give me your information, I would love to find out for you and get back to you about that. And also being willing to share a story, getting back to the storytelling, about themselves where they were vulnerable. And I think that one of the people that does this really well is Brene Brown, who is like my hero, my guru. She is able to show when she's speaking about herself a certain vulnerability, a willing to take a risk, to maybe look a little silly to an audience. But it comes across as just very authentic. And I think that's what every audience wants, is somebody who is authentic.
Let me ask you about that, the authentic and vulnerability and the first impressions kind of thing all together, because I once saw someone stand up and start a presentation by saying, I'm really nervous because I'm really an introvert. And it was a little bit of a vulnerability, and yeah, it maybe made us want to root for him more, but not in the way that it did not portray that confidence that you were talking about. So it was, you know what I mean? And I would have advised him differently on that.
Yeah, I don't know that I would ever say I'm really nervous as a vulnerability thing. Even if you are nervous, I think that's probably that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. I think that's one of those things you just kind of bury down inside of you. Now, I think saying, I'm glad to be here, but I got to share with you, I'm really an introvert. And again, it all depends on the delivery. Like say, ooh, I'm an introvert is not going to
Right.
inspire the same confidence as, hey guys, how are you? I'm an introvert. I just want to own that. So I
Yeah.
think, again, it's all about the delivery.
I want to add to that. You're both absolutely right, because there is this misperception, and it's interesting, this being vulnerable but also not taking down your credibility. You walk a fine line, because you're right, Susan, there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm really an introvert, but let's give this a go, versus coming out and saying, I'm nervous. I advise all my clients and my students, do not admit that up top, because like Randy said, lots of times the speaker thinks, oh, if I let them know I'm nervous, they'll forgive my missteps. And the opposite's true, because
Right.
the audience wants to see a confident speaker who knows what they're doing. And why put anything negative out there that's going to take their opinion of you down a notch in their mind before you've even started?
When it comes to webinars, Susan, what are the do's and don'ts you see from presenters in that kind of format?
I think that more than anything else, a presenter that's not prepared, for me, is just really hard to watch on a webinar. And you're hitting that balance between knowing what you want to say. You've already got a barrier between you and the audience, so you're sort of reacting to yourself and maybe who else you can see on the screen. But you have to make sure that you're prepared enough that you're not constantly doing this. And looking down at your notes and kind of doing this kind of up and down thing. You can get away with some of that when you're doing a presentation in person, because you can kind of shift those movements. You can kind of hide them as you're walking around a room and you're talking. But when you're like, here, I'm sitting down, I can't really get up and
Yeah,
walk around, and I can't check my notes and things like that. But the engagement is harder, I believe, on a webinar. And I think the speaker has to work more diligently and be more precise. And I think the one thing about a benefit of the webinar is that people's names can come up if you're like doing a Zoom, and you can say to them, hey, Joe, can you tell me what you think about this? So you can make that personal connection.
Yeah, in some ways it can be more interactive than a live event if you take advantage of the ways that it can be, and it can even be more intimate.
Right.
Yeah, I have a question for either of you, Susan or Randy. What are some ways you like to see the speaker be interactive, or how can a speaker be more interactive in a virtual format like this?
I love to encourage people, if I'm speaking on a webinar, to mention something in the chat at any time. And whether that's a question, whether that's a comment on a question that I have, I always keep that open and keep an eye on it and keep that going as a dialogue. If they're willing to throw something in, then they're fair game for that to be discussed publicly. So I like to then engage with them in kind of a running way, which you really wouldn't have the option of doing if it were a live presentation. People can't just interject and slip side notes, and you decide on the fly what to incorporate into what you're saying.
Yeah. One of the tricks I've sort of found is, as I've been doing more and more of the webinars and these Zoom meetings, is I've been opening up the room before I get there. And I know that some people do and some people don't if they're the host of the meeting. But I have found that when a couple of people get in there ahead of you, they start kind of, you're like, oh, hey, I'm Susan, and I'm Mare. And so they start already breaking down a little bit of those barriers. And I think that's been really helpful. And that's just something I started. I always used to hold off on the meeting until I would be the host, and then I'd open it up and everybody would be there at one time. So that's something I've just kind of discovered lately.
Susan, thank you for being with us and for sharing that.
Yeah, Susan, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us on Between Two Speakers.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Bye,
Thanks
everybody.
for watching.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.